The doors didn't open. They exploded. Glass rained across the waiting room floor at Meridian General Hospital in Tacoma. As a man built like a freight container tore through the entrance, blood streaming down his forearm, eyes locked on something no one else could see. Patients screamed. Security guards froze. Doctors backed against walls. The only person who didn't move was a 33-year-old trauma nurse nobody in that building had ever bothered to learn the last name of. She'd spent 4 months being talked over, stepped around, dismissed as some temp who didn't belong. Tonight, she was about to become the only thing standing between a war zone and a body count. Before we go further, if you want to see exactly how far this story travels, follow along to the very end, hit like, and drop a comment with the name of your city. I read every single one, and I want to see just how far this story has reached. Passion. The night had started ordinary enough, which in an ER meant it had started with a car wreck, a chest pain that turned out to be acid reflux, and a kid who'd swallowed a marble and would not stop crying about it. Nora Vance had been on shift since 6 that morning, double booked because 2 nurses had called out, and nobody upstairs cared whose schedule absorbed the difference. She didn't complain. She never complained. That was in its own way part of the problem. Vance, can you restock Bay 4 before you do anything else? Dr. Holloway didn't look up from his tablet when he said it. He rarely looked at her at all. On it, she said, already moving. Holloway was the kind of attending who'd been at Meridian 11 years and treated that tenure like a title. He wasn't cruel exactly. He was just the sort of man who decided within 30 seconds of meeting someone what they were worth, and he decided Nora Vance was a placeholder. Travel nurse. Here for a contract, gone in 6 months, didn't know the building, didn't know the culture, didn't know anybody. He wasn't wrong about the contract part. He was wrong about everything else. Nobody at Meridian knew that 4 years earlier, Nora had been crouched in the dust outside Kandahar with a tourniquet in her teeth, calling out vitals over gunfire to a medevac pilot who couldn't hear her over his own rotors. Nobody knew she'd run a forward aid station with 11 critical casualties and no surgeon for 6 hours. They knew her as the new nurse who kept her head down, did her job, and didn't argue when people were rude to her, which in hospital politics often got mistaken for weakness. "She's quiet," one of the younger techs, Priya, said once in the break room, not unkindly. "Like, suspiciously quiet." "She's probably just shy," someone else said. Nora had been standing 2 feet away restocking gauze. Nobody noticed her there either. Security at Meridian was run by a man named Russo, a retired city cop who'd taken the hospital gig for the pension and treated every shift like it was beneath him. He'd clocked Nora exactly twice in 4 months, both times to tell her she'd parked in the wrong lot. He didn't know she'd been trained to disarm a man twice her size in under 4 seconds. He didn't know much about anybody, honestly. He mostly sat at the front desk scrolling his phone and assumed the metal detector would handle anything serious. It would not handle what was coming. Marcus Renner had been a name on a classified roster 6 years earlier, Force Recon, attached to a joint special operations task force that didn't officially exist on any organizational chart the public could request through FOIA. He'd done 4 deployments that left marks nobody could see on an X-ray. 2 years ago, after an IED took the men on either side of him and left him alive for reasons he still couldn't forgive himself for, he'd been discharged with a diagnosis that took up half a page and a treatment plan that fit on a sticky note. Therapy twice a month, medication he stopped taking, and a phone number for the VA crisis line that he'd deleted. He had a sister, Dana, who lived in Tacoma. He'd been staying on her couch for 3 weeks, sleeping maybe 2 hours a night, his mind looping the same 6 seconds of an explosion that had happened 4,000 miles and 2 years away. That night, Dana had called 911 on her own brother because he'd started smashing furniture, convinced, truly, physically convinced, that the living room was the inside of a collapsed building and she was trapped under debris that wasn't there. The paramedics who responded weren't trained for what they walked into. Marcus had thrown one of them through a coffee table before they ever got a sedative near him. By the time the ambulance reached Meridian, he wasn't strapped down so much as barely contained, and the moment the rear doors opened, he heard his sister's name shouted somewhere in his head, not in the present, but somewhere back in that building that didn't exist, and he ran. He hit the ER entrance like a battering ram. The automatic doors weren't built for a 240-pound man moving at a dead sprint. The frame buckled. Glass sheared off in long, jagged sheets and scattered across the tile. A woman in the waiting room dropped her coffee and screamed. A man near the vending machine threw his arms up and ran for the hallway. Russo, at the front desk, fumbled for a radio he hadn't touched in months and dropped it. "Where is she? Where is she?" Marcus roared, his voice cracking with a kind of grief that didn't sound like rage, but moved exactly like it. Holloway froze mid-sentence, tablet still in his hand. Priya backed into a supply cart and knocked over a tray of syringes. Two security guards who should have intervened instead did the math on their own safety and didn't like the answer. Nora was 60 feet away, restocking Bay 4 exactly like she'd been told. She heard the impact before she saw anything. Glass. Metal frame buckling, a scream that wasn't pain, it was panic, which was a different sound entirely, and she'd learned the difference a long time ago in a place much hotter than Tacoma. She didn't run toward it. She didn't run away from it either. She walked, fast, controlled, the way she'd been trained to move toward chaos instead of away from it, because the people who ran toward it were the ones who kept others alive. "Everybody who can walk, get to the east corridor now," she said, not loudly, but with a flatness that cut through the noise better than shouting would have. A few people listened. Most didn't. Most were too busy staring at the man in the center of the room. Marcus had grabbed an IV pole and was holding it like he didn't quite know what it was anymore, swinging it at shapes that weren't there. A gurney went sideways. A monitor crashed off a counter, and the screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Holloway tried, to his very small credit, to step forward with his hands raised. "Sir, I need you to calm down. You're in a hospital." Marcus turned on him so fast that Holloway's voice died in his throat. "Where is Dana?" "There's no Dana here, sir. Just relax. You're lying to me." The IV pole came around in a wide arc, and Holloway threw himself backward over a chair, more luck than skill keeping the metal from connecting with his skull. Nora reached the edge of the trauma bay and stopped. She didn't stop because she was afraid. She stopped because the first rule of triage in a hot zone wasn't to engage, it was to read. She watched his eyes, pupils blown wide, scanning fast, not actually seeing the room he was in. She watched his stance, weight forward, shoulders rolled, a posture she'd seen in exactly one other context. Hyperarousal, dissociative break, the body locked into a fight response from somewhere that wasn't here. She watched his hands, trained hands. The grip on that IV pole wasn't panic, it was muscle memory. A man who'd held a rifle that way for years and didn't know he was holding a hollow aluminum pole instead. Combat veteran. Recent. Severe. "Everyone stay back," she said, loud enough now to carry. And for the first time in 4 months, people actually listened to her, mostly because nobody else was saying anything useful. "Vance, what are you doing?" Holloway hissed from the floor. She ignored him. She stepped into the open space, hands visible, palms down, slow and deliberate. The same way she used to approach a panicked casualty who might mistake a medic for a threat. "Marcus," she said. The name landed somewhere underneath the noise in his head. He turned toward her, IV pole still raised, breathing like a man who'd been running for miles. "How do you know my name?" She didn't, actually. She'd read it off the paramedic tag, still clipped somehow to his torn shirt collar, a detail nobody else in the room had bothered to notice because they were all too busy being afraid. But she said it like she'd always known him. "You're looking for your sister," she said. "She's not here. But I can help you find her." "They took her. The building came down and they took her." "I know. I was there too." It was a lie built entirely out of truth. She had been in buildings that came down, had pulled people out of rubble that smelled like concrete dust and copper, had lost track of who screamed for whom in the chaos. She wasn't lying about the experience. She was lying about the location, and right now the location didn't matter. What mattered was giving his brain a thread of recognition to hold on to instead of the panic. "You don't know anything," he snarled, but the pole dropped 2 inches. Just 2. Enough. "Shadow 6, she said. It wasn't a magic phrase. It wasn't a password. It was the name of a joint training cadre she'd rotated through years ago, working alongside force recon elements on combined casualty extraction drills. The kind of program that existed in briefings and after-action reports and almost nowhere else. The kind of thing that, if you'd lived inside it, you didn't forget the sound of. Marcus's whole body stopped moving. For 1 full second, the room held its breath. Holloway, still on the floor, blinked up at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. Priya, half hidden behind the supply cart, mouthed the words silently to herself, not understanding them at all. "Say that again," Marcus said. His voice had changed, lower, confused, a man surfacing from underwater for half a breath. "Shadow 6, she repeated. "Casualty extraction. You ran point on the live fire drills out of Bragg. I was on the medic side. That's not—" He shook his head, hard, like he was trying to physically dislodge the disorientation. "That's classified. Nobody talks about that." "I'm not talking about it. I'm telling you I was there." For one fragile moment, something behind his eyes clicked into place. Not full recognition, not a name or a face, just the unmistakable shape of someone who'd actually lived inside the same nightmare he had, speaking a language only a handful of people on the planet shared. His shoulders dropped half an inch. The pole lowered another 2 inches. And then the building collapsed again behind his eyes, and he was back in it. And the rage came roaring back twice as hard, because now there was a stranger inside the memory with him, and his brain couldn't process that, couldn't reconcile it, and the only response his nervous system had left was violence. "Get away from me!" The IV pole swung. Nora didn't dodge so much as redirect. A small lateral step, a hand catching the pole's shaft at the fulcrum point instead of trying to stop its full weight, letting his own momentum carry it past her instead of fighting it head-on. It clattered off a counter behind her. He overcorrected, stumbling half a step, and in that half-second of imbalance, she saw an opening that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. She didn't take it. Not yet. Because a man that size, that disoriented, taken down wrong, could end up with a fractured trachea or a head injury that turned a psychiatric crisis into a homicide investigation. She wasn't trying to win a fight. She was trying to keep him alive long enough for his own brain to come back online. "Marcus, look at me." Her voice dropped, flattened further, became almost hypnotic in its evenness. "You're not in that building. You're in a hospital, Tacoma, Meridian General. Your sister called us because she's worried about you, not because anything's collapsed. You're lying, but there was less certainty in it now." "I don't lie to people I'm trying to help." She kept her hands visible, kept her weight balanced, kept 3 feet of distance that was close enough to act and far enough to react. "What's today's date, Marcus?" The question hit him sideways, the way grounding questions were designed to. His eyes flickered, processing, failing, processing again. "I don't—" He stopped, pressed both palms against his temples hard, like he was trying to physically crush something. "I don't know." "That's okay. That's okay. You don't have to know right now. I just need you to breathe with me for 1 second." For the second time, the room went still, and this time it lasted 3 full seconds instead of 1, and 3 seconds was almost enough. Almost. Because that was the exact moment a security guard near the entrance, new hire, 24 years old, scared out of his mind, doing the worst possible thing at the worst possible time, decided to be a hero and rushed Marcus from behind with a stun device he had exactly 4 hours of training on. The shock didn't fully connect. It clipped Marcus across the shoulder instead of the center mass. Enough to hurt, nowhere near enough to drop him, and what it did instead was detonate every ounce of progress Nora had just spent 90 seconds building. He roared, spun, and the part of his brain that had been a half-second from surfacing slammed back underwater with a vengeance. And now he wasn't disoriented anymore. He was cornered, and cornered. Men did the most dangerous thing a human being could do. He grabbed the nearest warm body, which happened to be Priya, and hauled her in front of him like a shield, one massive forearm locked across her collarbone, her feet barely touching the ground. The room exploded into screaming. "Everybody out! Go! Go! Now!" Nora barked, and this time there was no hesitation from anyone, people scattering toward the exits, Holloway dragging himself up and stumbling backward, the young guard standing frozen with his useless stun device dangling from his hand, mouth open, realizing in real time exactly how badly he'd just made things worse. "You move. She dies," Marcus said, and his voice had gone somewhere cold and flat and very far away, somewhere that didn't sound like grief anymore. It sounded like a man who'd been trained to issue exactly that kind of sentence and had, somewhere in his service, meant it. Priya whimpered, eyes wide, fixed on Nora like she was the only fixed point left in a spinning world. "Marcus, listen to me." Nora kept her hands up, kept her voice level, every cell in her body screaming to move and every part of her training screaming louder to hold still. She's not part of this. Let her go, and it's just you and me. Everybody lies to me. Everybody in this whole building has been lying to me since I walked in. I haven't lied to you yet. You said Shadow 6. His grip on Priya tightened, and she gasped. How does a nurse know about Shadow 6? Because I wasn't always a nurse the way you think I'm a nurse. She held his eyes, unblinking, letting the words land with whatever weight they had left. I ran med support on extraction drills out of Bragg under Colonel Whitfield's command before I ever set foot in a civilian ER. I've pulled men twice your size out of vehicles on fire. I'm not scared of you, Marcus. I'm scared of what happens to that girl if you don't put her down in the next 10 seconds. And I think some part of you, somewhere under everything spinning in your head right now, doesn't actually want to hurt her. You want someone to make it stop. Something in his jaw trembled. I can't make it stop, he said. And for the first time his voice cracked into something that sounded less like a threat and more like a man drowning in front of a room full of people who could only watch. It doesn't stop. It's been 2 years and it doesn't stop. I know, she said quietly. I know it doesn't, but hurting her won't make it stop either. It'll just give you one more thing you can't undo. His arm loosened, just slightly. Priya's feet found the floor. And then from down the corridor came the sound that ruined everything for the second time that night. The heavy double thump of boots, gear, and raised voices as the first wave of Tacoma PD tactical response came around the corner with weapons drawn, shouting commands, flooding into a situation they did not have 90 seconds of context for. Drop the weapon, drop her, get on the ground. Marcus's whole body went rigid, every muscle locking into a posture Nora recognized instantly, because she'd seen it in exactly one other place. A man who'd just heard armed strangers shouting commands at him, and whose nervous system, shaped by years of training to treat that exact sound as the prelude to a firefight, had nowhere safe left to go. Nobody move, he screamed and yanked Priya backward toward the trauma bay doors, toward the heart of the department, toward dozens of patients who couldn't run. And the standoff that had almost ended 30 seconds earlier detonated back into something far worse than where it had started. Nora's eyes flicked once toward the tactical team filling the corridor behind her, weapons raised, adrenaline high, fingers far too close to triggers for her comfort. She knew exactly how this kind of scene usually ended when armed responders met a destabilized combat veteran holding a hostage. She'd seen the reports. She'd read the outcomes. They were rarely good. She had maybe 4 seconds to decide whether she was going to let this play out the way everyone expected, or do something about it herself. She stepped directly between Marcus and the leveled weapons, arms raised, voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Hold your fire! Everybody hold! And the entire ER, full of cops, doctors, screaming bystanders, and one terrified hostage, froze to see what the invisible nurse nobody had bothered to learn the name of was about to do next. The lead tactical officer, a barrel-chested sergeant named Doyle, kept his weapon trained on the space over Nora's shoulder, jaw tight, eyes flicking between her and the man behind her like he was doing math he didn't like the answer to. Ma'am, you need to get out of the line of fire right now. There is no line of fire, Nora said, not turning around, not lowering her arms. Not unless somebody pulls a trigger and turns a psychiatric crisis into a body bag. Stand your people down. He's got a hostage. I'm aware. This isn't a negotiation. This is a hostage situation. That's our jurisdiction. It's my ER. Her voice didn't rise, but something in it sharpened, the kind of edge that made even a tactical sergeant pause for half a beat. 40 seconds ago, he was talking. He was coming back. Your guy with the stun gun undid that, and if your team rushes in here with rifles raised, you're going to finish what he started, and that girl in his arms is going to pay for it. Give me 60 seconds. Doyle's eyes narrowed. Behind him, 3 more officers fanned into the corridor, weapons low but ready, radios crackling with chatter Nora couldn't fully parse over the ringing in her own ears. You a hostage negotiator? No. Then what the hell are you? She didn't answer that. There wasn't time, and there wasn't a short version anyway. Behind her, Marcus had backed 3 more steps into the trauma bay, dragging Priya with him, his eyes locked on the line of weapons in the corridor like they were the only thing in the world. His breathing had gone ragged again, shallow and fast. The kind of breathing that preceded either a complete collapse or a complete explosion, and Nora genuinely didn't know which one was coming. "They're going to shoot me," Marcus said, not quite to her, not quite to himself. "They're going to shoot me right here." "Nobody's shooting anybody." She said it loud enough for Doyle to hear too, half a command and half a promise she had no actual authority to make. "Marcus, I need you to look at me, not at them." "I can't." His arm trembled around Priya's collarbone, and the girl made a small, terrified sound, the first noise she'd made in almost a minute. "I can't think with all of them pointing guns at me. I can't." "Then don't think about them. Think about me. You know my voice. You knew it 30 seconds ago before the alarm went off in your head. Find that again." Doyle muttered something into his radio, low and clipped, and Nora caught just enough of it to know he was requesting a crisis negotiation unit, which in a city the size of Tacoma could mean anywhere from 8 minutes to 25, and she didn't have 8 minutes, let alone 25. She had whatever was left of Marcus's grip on reality, and that grip was fraying in real time. "Sergeant," she said, still facing forward, "pull your people back to the corridor mouth, out of his direct sight line. Let me have the room." "Absolutely not." "You're not helping by standing there. You're making it worse. Every second he sees rifles, his brain reads this as a firefight, and men like him don't surrender in firefights. They fight until they can't anymore. You want a peaceful resolution? Get out of his eye line." A long pause. Doyle's gaze flicked to his lieutenant, somewhere off to the side. A silent question passed between them that Nora couldn't read. Finally, grudgingly, Doyle barked an order, and the line of officers stepped back, just far enough that the muzzles weren't directly visible from where Marcus stood, though Nora knew full well they hadn't actually gone anywhere. It was theater. It would have to be enough. "They're gone," she told him. "Look, just you and me and her. Nobody else." Marcus's eyes darted to the empty corridor mouth, confused, like he expected a trick, like every part of the last 2 years had trained him to expect a trick. But the rifles weren't visible anymore, and some small, exhausted part of his nervous system took that as permission to ease, just slightly, just enough that his arm around Priya's collarbone loosened from a vice into something closer to a grip. "You said you were there," he said. "Bragg. Shadow 6. "I was." "Prove it." "I don't carry ID for a program that officially doesn't exist, Marcus. You know that better than anyone." That landed. His mouth twisted, something between a laugh and a sob. Yeah, I know that." "Tell me a name," she said. "Anyone you ran with. I'll tell you if I know them." It was a gamble, the kind of gamble that could blow up in her face if he asked about someone she'd never heard of, but she was betting on something else entirely. Not the specific name, but the act of retrieving it. Memory recall was a grounding technique, one of the oldest tools in the book, dragging a destabilized mind out of the present catastrophe and into something concrete, something real, something that had an actual textured shape instead of the formless dread currently flooding his system. "Briggs," he said slowly. "Tobias Briggs. Ran point on the Bragg rotation, 81 through 84. 8101. Nora's stomach dropped slightly, because she didn't know a Tobias Briggs, had never heard the name in her life. And for a half second she considered just nodding anyway, just lying her way through it, before some instinct told her that lying to a man whose entire crisis was built on not trusting what was real would be the single worst thing she could do in this moment. "I don't know him," she said. "I rotated through later, different cohort." Marcus stared at her, and for one terrible second she thought the honesty had cost her everything, that he'd take it as proof she was lying about all of it, that the whole fragile bridge she'd built out of a single shared phrase was about to collapse under its own weight. Instead, something in his shoulders sagged. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, that's a real answer. Nobody's given me a real answer all night." Priya, still locked against his chest, let out a shuddering breath, and Nora watched her carefully, gauging how much longer the girl could hold herself together without breaking down completely and triggering a fresh wave of panic in Marcus. "You're doing great," Nora told her, soft, steady. "Just keep breathing. We're almost there." They weren't almost anywhere, But sometimes the lie that mattered was the one that gave someone enough hope to survive the next 10 seconds. And Nora had learned a long time ago which lies were worth telling. Behind the corridor mouth, out of Marcus's sightline, but well within shouting distance, Holloway had recovered enough to stand upright, nursing a wrist he'd likely sprained diving over that chair. And he watched the scene unfold with an expression that had shifted somewhere from disbelief into something closer to shame, though he wasn't ready to name it that yet. "Who is she?" he asked Doyle, low, almost accusatory, like the question itself was an inconvenience. "Why does she know what she's doing?" "You tell me," Doyle said. "She's your staff." "She's a contract nurse, 4 months. I don't even know her last name." A young officer near them, headset still pressed to one ear, glanced over. "Vance, Nora Vance, pulled her file when dispatch asked for ID on hospital personnel near the hostage. Prior service, Army, combat medic, 2 tours, separated with a commendation file thicker than my forearm." Holloway's mouth opened slightly and nothing came out. "You didn't know that?" the officer asked, not unkindly, just curious. "No," Holloway said. "I didn't know that." Inside the trauma bay, the standoff had entered a strange, suspended kind of stillness, the sort that experienced first responders recognized as the most dangerous phase of any crisis. Not the explosion, but the quiet after, when everything could still go either way, and the smallest miscalculation tipped it permanently in one direction. Nora kept her hands visible, kept her voice low, kept 3 feet of distance that had become, in her mind, a kind of sacred geometry she would not violate, no matter how badly her instincts screamed to close it. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about the answer instead of just reacting." "What?" "What does Dana need right now? Not what does your head tell you happened to her. What does the real Donna, the one who called 911 because she was scared for her brother, need from you in this moment?" His jaw worked silently for several seconds. Behind his eyes, something was fighting something else, a war that had nothing to do with the room they were standing in. "She needs me to not be like this," he finally said, voice cracking on the last word. "She needs me to not be a person who does this." "Then let's not be that person. Right now. Just for the next minute. Let her go, Marcus. Not because of the cops. Not because you're scared. Because it's what Dana actually needs, and you know it." Priya's feet, which had been barely touching the floor for the better part of 2 minutes, settled fully flat as his arm slackened further. And for one suspended heartbeat, Nora believed, genuinely believed, that this was about to end the way it should have ended 5 minutes ago, before a panicked rookie with 4 hours of stun gun training decided to be a hero. Then a gurney rolled, unattended, somewhere deeper in the trauma bay, knocked loose by a draft or a careless elbow or simple bad luck, and the metallic clatter it made against a steel cabinet sounded, to a nervous system primed for explosions, exactly like incoming fire. Marcus's entire body convulsed. "Down! Everybody, down!" he screamed, and his arms snapped back around Priya like a steel trap, yanking her off her feet entirely, and the careful inch of progress Nora had built over the last 90 seconds detonated into nothing. "It's nothing. It's just equipment. Nobody's shooting." Nora's voice cut through, fast now, no longer slow and hypnotic but urgent, trying to outrun the panic before it metastasized into something irreversible. "They're flanking us!" He was no longer looking at her. He was looking somewhere else entirely, somewhere with a different sky and different walls, and Nora understood with a cold certainty that she had lost him, completely. That whatever bridge existed between the man holding a hostage in a Tacoma ER and the man who could hear a stranger's voice and find his way back had just been severed. He started backing toward the supply closet at the rear of the trauma bay, dragging Priya, scanning corners that didn't have anyone in them, muttering coordinates and call signs in a low, frantic stream that made no sense to anyone in the room except possibly him. Doyle's voice crackled over the radio, audible even from where Nora stood. "He's deteriorating. I need eyes on a clean shot." "No." Nora didn't shout it toward the corridor. She shouted it directly at Doyle through the open doorway, loud enough to cut through his radio chatter. "You take a shot in here. You've got patients in beds 12 feet away who can't run. You've got staff hiding behind every cabinet in this room. And you've got a destabilized combat veteran whose training means he will not go down clean even if you hit him center mass. Stand down. That's not your call, ma'am. Then whose call is it? Because right now I'm the only person in this building who's gotten within 3 feet of him and walked away. And you've had a rifle pointed at a hostage situation for 4 minutes without a single de-escalation plan beyond yelling commands at a man who can't process commands right now. The silence that followed wasn't agreement, but it wasn't an order to fire either, and Nora took the half-second of hesitation and used it. She stepped forward, not toward Marcus exactly, toward the angle, the geometry of the room, positioning herself so that any line of sight Doyle's team had toward Marcus would have to pass through her first. A human obstruction she was placing there entirely on purpose, betting her own life on the idea that nobody, not even a tactical sergeant under pressure, would take a shot through a nurse to get to a hostage taker unless there was no other option left. "Vance, get out of the way!" Doyle barked. "No." "That's an order." "You don't outrank me, Sergeant. Nobody here does." It wasn't strictly true, not in any legal or institutional sense, but it didn't need to be true. It needed to buy 10 more seconds, and it did, because Doyle's training told him that shooting through a civilian to reach a target, even an armed and dangerous one, was the kind of decision that ended careers and started investigations, and that hesitation, born of policy rather than mercy, gave Nora exactly the window she needed. "Marcus," she kept her voice steady even though her pulse was hammering hard enough now that she could feel it in her throat. "Listen to my voice. Not the coordinates, not the call signs. Me." He didn't answer. He'd backed almost fully into the supply closet doorway, Priya still locked against him, his eyes wide and unfocused, scanning a battlefield that existed only inside his skull. "You told me Dana needs you to not be this person," Nora said. "She's listening right now. I promise you she is. Somewhere outside this hospital, your sister is standing in a parking lot, terrified out of her mind. And the only thing she wants in this entire world is for her brother to walk out of here breathing. Not a hero, not a soldier, just breathing." Something in the word breathing seemed to land differently than everything before it. Maybe because it was the most basic animal thing she could have said, stripped of all the tactical language and crisis counseling phrasing, just a plain human request. His chest heaved. His eyes, for the first time in almost a minute, flicked toward her instead of past her. "I don't want to hurt anybody," he said, and his voice had dropped into something raw and exhausted, the sound of a man who'd been fighting a war inside his own skull for 2 straight years and had nothing left to fight with. I don't know how to make it stop." "You don't have to make it stop today. You just have to put her down." His arm trembled. Priya whimpered again, soft, barely audible. And then, from somewhere down the hallway behind the police line, a new voice cut through the tension, calm, low, carrying an authority that made even Doyle's head turn. "Sergeant, stand your people down. I'll take it from here." A man in a plain gray jacket stepped into view, no uniform, no visible weapon, moving with the unhurried economy of someone who had walked into rooms like this before and had no intention of rushing now. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had seen things and decided long ago not to react to most of them anymore. "Who the hell are you?" Doyle said, though something in his posture had already shifted, deferential despite himself. "Colonel Eli Whitfield, retired." He held up a credential, flashed it fast, put it away just as fast. "I run a Veterans Crisis Liaison program that gets looped in on incidents involving prior service members in psychiatric distress. Dispatch flagged this one 20 minutes ago. I came as fast as the bridge traffic allowed." His eyes moved past Doyle, toward the trauma bay, toward Nora standing in that doorway with her hands raised and a hostage situation suspended on a thread thinner than anyone in that hallway wanted to admit. And unless I'm very wrong, that's Nora Vance standing in there talking him down, which means somebody finally did something right tonight. Doyle blinked. "You know her?" "I know her file," Whitfield said. "I read it 8 years ago when I tried to recruit her into exactly this kind of work, and she turned me down flat because she said she was done being anybody's secret weapon." A thin, tired smile crossed his face. "Looks like the universe disagreed." Eat. Inside the trauma bay, Marcus had gone quiet, his breathing slowing by degrees that were almost imperceptible. The kind of slowing that could be progress or could be the calm before total collapse, and Nora had no way of knowing which until the next 30 seconds played out. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me," she said. "I need you to set her down, gently. You don't have to let go of everything. You don't have to surrender. You don't have to do anything except put her feet flat on the ground and step back 2 steps. That's all I'm asking, 2 steps." His eyes were wet now, glassy, the rigid mask of combat readiness cracking apart in real time to reveal the exhausted, grieving man underneath it. "If I let go," he said, "it's real. All of it becomes real again." "It's already real," Nora said gently. "It's been real this whole time. The only thing that changes when you let her go is that nobody else gets hurt because of it." A long, shuddering breath left him, and his arm finally, fully released. Priya dropped to her knees the second her feet hit solid ground, scrambling backward in a desperate crab walk until she collided with a cabinet and curled against it, sobbing, finally allowed to fall apart now that the danger had passed. Marcus stood alone in the doorway of the supply closet, hands empty, shoulders slumped, looking less like the 7-foot storm that had torn through the entrance 20 minutes earlier and more like exactly what he was. A broken man who'd been fighting a war that had ended on paper 2 years ago and never actually ended anywhere else. "On the ground!" Doyle's voice barked from the corridor, officers flooding forward now that the hostage was clear, and Marcus, drained of everything, sank to his knees without resistance, hands laced behind his head, the fight gone out of him completely. Nora stepped forward as the officers closed in, positioning herself between Marcus and the first set of cuffs. "He needs medical restraint, not criminal processing. He's in psychiatric crisis, not committing a robbery. Somebody get a sedation protocol ready before he ends up in a holding cell that's going to make this 10 times worse." "Ma'am, step back," one of the officers said, reaching for Marcus's wrist. "I'm a nurse, and this is my patient now. And unless you want a lawsuit about denial of medical care to a documented combat veteran in acute psychiatric distress, you'll let me supervise his transfer to the psych unit instead of a squad car." The officer hesitated, glanced at Doyle, who gave a single, tired nod. Whitfield had drifted closer during the exchange, watching the whole sequence with an expression that mixed exhaustion and something close to pride. And when Nora finally turned, breathing hard, hands shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go, she found herself looking directly at a face from 8 years and several thousand miles ago. "Colonel?" she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word, not from fear this time, but from sheer depleted exhaustion. "You look exactly the same," Whitfield said. "Still running into burning buildings other people are running away from." "It's a hospital, sir, not a building. Technically." Technically. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, which were still scanning the wreckage of the trauma bay, the broken monitors, the shattered front entrance, the dozens of staff slowly emerging from behind carts and counters now that the immediate danger had passed. "You did good work in there. Better than good. You kept that man alive when half the people in this building wanted him dropped, and you kept that girl alive when one bad shot could have taken them both out. I almost lost him twice. You didn't lose him at all. That's the part that matters." Holloway approached slowly from the corridor, wrist cradled against his chest. His expression caught somewhere between gratitude and a deep, uncomfortable reckoning with everything he'd assumed about the woman he'd spent 4 months treating like furniture. "Vance," he started and stopped, visibly searching for words that didn't come easily to a man who wasn't used to being wrong. I don't even know what that was. How did you know what to do?" "I did this for a living before I did this for a living," she said, flat, not unkind, but not offering him an easy out either. "You should have told someone. I told you my name and my license number on my first day. You never asked for anything else." She wasn't angry exactly, just tired, the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent months being invisible and had just spent the last 20 minutes being the only visible thing standing between order and catastrophe. "Nobody here was interested in who I used to be, just whether I'd restocked Bay 4. Holloway had no answer for that, and to his credit, he didn't try to manufacture one. Marcus, still kneeling, restraints loose around his wrists at Nora's insistence rather than full lockdown cuffs, looked up at her with something that hadn't been in his eyes all night. Clarity, fragile and temporary, but real. "Shadow 6, he said quietly. "Was that even true? Were you really there? She crouched down to his eye level, close enough that only he could hear the answer, and for a long moment she said nothing at all, weighing exactly how much of the truth a man in his condition could carry without it breaking something else inside him. "No," she finally admitted. "I made it up. I needed something that would make you stop and listen, and that was the only thing I had." His face crumpled, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief, like the one fragment of solid ground he'd found in the middle of the storm had just dissolved underneath him. "Then how did you know what it meant?" he whispered. "How did you know exactly what to say?" And Nora opened her mouth to answer him, when every light in the ER cut out at once, plunging the shattered trauma bay into sudden total darkness. And somewhere down the corridor, a second alarm began screaming. This one, not for Marcus Renner, but for something else entirely, something that had just walked through what remained of Meridian's broken front entrance, while every officer in the building had their attention locked on the wrong threat. The darkness lasted 4 seconds before the emergency generators kicked in, bathing the trauma bay in the dimmer, bluish wash of backup lighting, and in those 4 seconds Nora's body had already moved without her permission, pivoting away from Marcus and toward the corridor, every muscle locked into the same readiness that had carried her through 100 nights exactly like this one in places much farther from home. The second alarm wasn't a fire alarm. It was the code she'd heard exactly twice in 4 months and hoped never to hear again. The active threat tone. 3 short bursts repeating, designed to cut through any other noise in the building. "Movement at the east entrance," a voice crackled over Doyle's radio, tight with a new kind of urgency. "Second subject, armed, ambulatory, ignoring verbal commands. Define armed," Doyle snapped back. A pause, then, "Looks like a sidearm, could be a replica. We don't have eyes confirmed." Nora's stomach dropped. Marcus, still kneeling, restraints loose, looked up sharply, some old instinct cutting through whatever fog remained in his head. "That's not for me," he said, half question, half realization. "No," Nora said, "it's not." Whitfield was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and clipped in a way that suggested decades of practice giving orders without raising his voice. "I need a perimeter lock on the east wing now, and somebody confirm whether this is connected to the Renner incident or a separate actor, because if it's separate, we have 2 live threats in one building and a tactical team that just stood down from the first one." The lights flickered again, the backup generator straining, and somewhere down the east corridor, past the cracked nurses' station and the overturned supply carts, a man's voice rose above the alarm, slurred and furious. "Where's my brother? Somebody tell me where they took my brother." Doyle's face went white. "That's not a second subject," he said slowly. "That's a relative." Somebody checked the admit log. "Who's Renner's emergency contact?" "Donna Renner," Nora said immediately. "His sister. She called it in." "Then who in God's name is screaming about a brother?" Wait. Nobody had an answer, and the not knowing was its own kind of dread. The particular helplessness of a building already stretched past its limits being asked to absorb one more variable nobody had accounted for. Nora made a decision she didn't have authority to make, and did it anyway. "Get Renner to the psych unit, now. Sedation protocol, 2-point restraint, continuous monitoring. I need eyes that aren't on me anymore." She looked at Doyle. "I'm going to the east corridor." "Absolutely not. You're not armed. You're not tactical. I'm the only person in this building who's gotten close enough to talk someone down tonight without anyone dying. You want to keep me in a hallway filling out incident paperwork while a second armed man wanders your ER? That's your call. But I'm telling you right now, it's the wrong one." Whitfield's eyes flicked between them, weighing something, and then he nodded once, sharp. "Let her go. She's earned the room." The east corridor was narrower than the main trauma bay, lined with patient rooms whose doors stood half open, monitors beeping erratically in the blue emergency light. A handful of staff crouched low behind desks and gurneys, faces pale with the particular fear of people who'd already survived one crisis tonight and couldn't believe they were being asked to survive a second. The man standing at the far end wasn't 7 feet of muscle and rage like Marcus had been. He was smaller, wiry, mid-40s, in a torn flannel shirt with a graze along his cheekbone that had bled down into his collar, and he was holding something low at his side that caught the emergency lighting in a dull metallic gleam. Real or replica, Nora couldn't tell from this distance, and that uncertainty was its own kind of danger because it meant treating every second as though it were real. Sir, she called out, hands visible, voice pitched to carry without sounding like a command. I need you to put that down and tell me what's going on. They took my brother. His eyes were wild, unfocused, and underneath the fury, Nora caught something else. The slack, drifting quality of someone deep into either alcohol or something stronger, a combination that made every de-escalation principle she'd ever learned twice as unreliable. Ambulance came, they put him in. They wouldn't tell me where, nobody will tell me anything. What's your name? Like that matters. It matters to me. I'm not talking to a threat. I'm talking to a man whose brother is missing, and that's a real thing to be scared about. Tell me your name. A long pause, his weight swaying slightly, the weapon, if it was a weapon, drifting an inch lower. Wyatt, he finally muttered. Wyatt Voss. Okay, Wyatt, I'm Nora. I work here. I need you to understand something important. We had a major incident in the main bay about 10 minutes ago, completely unrelated to your brother. And right now there are a lot of very frightened, very jumpy police officers in this building who do not know you're just looking for family. If you're holding anything in that hand, even something that isn't real, somebody could make a decision in the next 30 seconds that you cannot take back. So I need you to set it down, slowly, where I can see it. Wyatt's jaw worked, his eyes darting past her toward the shadows, where two officers had silently taken position, weapons low but ready, the muscle memory of the last 20 minutes still running hot in the building's bloodstream. They'll shoot me, he said. Not if you put it down. Everybody always says that right before it happens. I don't know what happened to you before tonight, Wyatt, and I'm not going to pretend I do, but I know what's happening right now in this hallway, and I am telling you the truth when I say the fastest way to see your brother again is to put that down. His hand trembled. The object, she could see it more clearly now. The angle's wrong for a real firearm, too uniform, too light in the way he held it. Almost certainly a BB pistol or an airsoft replica he'd grabbed off a porch or a truck seat in a moment of panic, lowered another inch. Then from behind Nora, a new voice cut through the standoff, frantic and breathless. Wyatt! A woman came pushing past the officers despite their attempts to hold her back. Hospital gown loose around her shoulders, an IV line still taped to the back of her hand, dragging a pole behind her with the kind of desperate strength that came from pure adrenaline overriding whatever sedation she'd been given 20 minutes earlier. Dana, Nora breathed, recognizing her from the admit photo. Marcus's sister. He's not dangerous. He's drunk. He's scared. He's been drinking since Marcus's episode started, and he doesn't know how to handle it. Please don't shoot him. Ma'am, get back, an officer started. He's my husband. Dana's voice cracked, raw and pleading. He's not part of this. He just panicked when he saw the ambulance and couldn't find me, please. Wyatt's whole body sagged at the sight of her, the fight draining out of him in an instant, the replica weapon clattering to the floor as both his hands came up, shaking, reaching toward her. Dana, I thought they wouldn't tell me anything. I thought you were... I'm fine. I'm right here. She crossed the last few feet and folded into him, IV pole and all, and the two officers behind Nora finally lowered their weapons, the tension in the corridor breaking all at once like a held breath finally released. Nora exhaled slowly, the adrenaline that had carried her through the last 90 seconds suddenly nowhere to go, and for the first time all night she felt the full weight of exhaustion crash into her at once. It didn't last. It never did. Not in nights like this. Down. Behind her, down the main corridor, Whitfield's voice rose sharply enough to carry even over the residual chaos. Vance, you need to see this. She turned, jogging back toward the trauma bay, weaving past gurneys and shattered equipment, and found Whitfield crouched beside the supply closet where Marcus had been kneeling minutes earlier, except Marcus wasn't there anymore. The two-point restraint sat empty on the floor, one strap cleanly cut rather than unbuckled, the edges frayed in a way that suggested a blade rather than simple struggle. He's gone, Whitfield said, low. 6 minutes since you left this room. Nobody saw him leave. That's not possible. I told them sedation protocol. Sedation hadn't been administered yet. Pharmacy was still processing the order when the lights went out, and in the confusion, somebody lost track of him. Whitfield's expression had gone hard, professional, all the warmth from earlier replaced with something colder. He cut his restraints with something. We don't know what. And he's a trained operative who just spent 20 minutes proving he can move through a building full of armed police without anyone stopping him. Nora's mind raced through the timeline, fast and clinical, the way she'd been trained to triage a deteriorating situation. He wasn't faking the crisis. I'd stake my license on that. But somewhere in the middle of it, some part of him came back online enough to recognize an opportunity. Or someone helped him. She looked up sharply. What? The restraint wasn't cut from the inside angle a struggling man would manage on his own. It was cut clean, precise, from an angle that suggests someone working from outside the strap, facing him. Whitfield held up the severed end, turning it slightly so she could see the cut for herself. Someone came in during the blackout, freed him, and got him out. And right now I don't know if that someone was a sympathizer, a recruiter, or something a lot worse. And either way, we have an unstabilized combat veteran loose in a building that's already half destroyed. Except now he's not panicking anymore. Now he's moving with help. Doyle's radio crackled again, the same tight urgency from before. We've got a visual, east stairwell, second floor, moving fast, not alone. Whitfield and Nora exchanged a single look, and without another word, both of them were moving. The exhaustion she'd felt 30 seconds earlier burned away by a fresh surge of adrenaline, because whatever was happening now had stopped looking like a psychiatric crisis and started looking like something engineered, something with intention behind it. And the only person in the building who'd gotten close enough to Marcus Renner to understand what was actually happening inside his head was about to find out exactly how much more dangerous he'd become with someone else pulling the strings. The east stairwell door had been propped open with a fire extinguisher, deliberate, not accidental, and Nora hit the landing 2 steps behind Whitfield with her pulse hammering and her mind running faster than her feet. Doyle's team fanned out below them, weapons raised, and for a moment the only sound in the stairwell was boots on concrete and breath ragged with exertion. Second floor, Whitfield said, reading the radio chatter off his earpiece. They've got eyes on the old admin wing. Half of it's been closed for renovation for 2 years. No cameras up there. Convenient, Nora muttered. Too convenient. They came through the second floor door into a corridor lined with plastic sheeting and exposed drywall, construction dust coating the floor in a fine gray film, and Nora's eyes went immediately to the boot prints cutting through it. 2 sets, moving fast, one significantly larger than the other, heading toward the old records archive at the far end. He's not alone, she said. Whoever cut him loose is walking him out personally. Doyle's voice came low behind them. We've got the building locked. Every exit's covered. Wherever they're going, it's a dead end. Unless they don't think it's a dead end, Whitfield said quietly. This used to be the old psych wing before the renovation. There's a service tunnel that connects to the old laundry building 2 blocks over. It was supposed to be sealed off during construction. Supposed to be, Nora repeated. They moved fast now. No more talking, just the controlled urgency of people who understood that every second mattered and every assumption could get someone killed. The boot prints led through a set of double doors hanging slightly ajar into what had once been a records room and why now a gutted shell of exposed studs and stacked drywall sheets, lit only by a single battery lantern someone had clearly brought with them, because the overhead power in this section had been cut for renovation months ago. Marcus stood near the lantern, no longer restrained, no longer raging, standing instead with the eerily still posture of a man who'd been talked down from one edge only to be walked, deliberately, toward another. Beside him stood a man Nora had never seen before. Mid-40s, compact, dressed in civilian clothes that did nothing to disguise a bearing that screamed prior military, maybe still active in some capacity that didn't show up on any roster she'd ever have access to. His eyes flicked to her the moment she stepped through the doorway, calm, assessing, entirely unsurprised. "Nurse Vance," he said. "I wondered how long it'd take you to catch up. You know my name. I know a lot of names." He didn't raise a weapon, didn't move aggressively, which somehow made him more unsettling than Marcus had been at his most violent. "I know Marcus's name. I know Colonel Whitfield's name too, though I doubt he remembers mine." Whitfield's expression had gone rigid, something working behind his eyes, calculation layered over recognition. "Hale," he said slowly. "Desmond Hale. It's been a while, Colonel. You were discharged, dishonorably, if I recall, for conduct unbecoming during the same program Marcus served under. Whitfield's voice had dropped into something flat and dangerous. What the hell are you doing in a Tacoma hospital? Finishing something you people started and never bothered to clean up. Hale's gaze slid back to Marcus, who stood beside him swaying slightly, eyes glassy, clearly still deep in some chemical or psychological fog that Nora was beginning to suspect hadn't been entirely organic. You want to know why he came apart tonight? Why a man who's been managing his symptoms for 2 years suddenly lost it in a hospital lobby? Tell me, Nora said. I gave him a little help. Hale's smile was thin, humorless. A compound, off the books, designed to lower inhibition and trigger dissociative episodes in subjects with a documented trauma history. Standard interrogation-adjacent research, the kind of work that gets defunded publicly and continues privately. Marcus here was a test case. He didn't know it. His sister didn't know it. The substance got into his system 3 days ago through something as simple as a contaminated supplement bottle, and tonight, right on schedule, it peaked. The room went very still. Nora felt something cold settle into her chest, a fury so precise it almost felt like calm. You poisoned a combat veteran, she said, to watch him break down in public. I poisoned a combat veteran to gather data, Hale corrected, unbothered. The breakdown was incidental, useful, but incidental. Data for who? That's not a conversation we're having tonight. Whitfield had gone very still, his hands loose at his sides in a way that Nora recognized from Marcus earlier. Not relaxed, coiled. You're telling me you ran an unauthorized human trial on a former operative under my old command inside an active hospital, and you're standing here explaining it like you're proud of it. I'm explaining it because it doesn't matter anymore whether you know. The building's locked, sure, but I've got 6 minutes before a vehicle outside that perimeter stops waiting for me, and I'm taking him with me because he's not finished giving me what I need. He's a human being, Nora said, not a sample. He's a liability who happens to still have value. Hale's eyes flicked to her, cold and assessing. And you, Nurse Vance, are an inconvenience I didn't plan for. Shadow 6, cute trick by the way. You don't actually have clearance for that designation, do you? You pulled it from somewhere, made an educated guess based on his service window, and got lucky. It wasn't luck. It was something. He shrugged, almost amused despite the gun now visible at his hip, a detail Nora hadn't clocked until exactly this moment, the casual way his hand drifted near it without quite touching. Doesn't matter. What matters is the next 90 seconds. Doyle, in the doorway behind them with 2 officers, raised his weapon. Hands where I can see them now. Hale didn't move. If your people open fire in this room, Sergeant, you'll hit a building full of exposed gas lines and unsecured construction debris, and you'll very possibly hit Marcus, who's standing directly behind me in a room with terrible sightlines. I'd encourage some patience. It wasn't a bluff. Nora's eyes swept the room in a half-second, cataloging what Hale had already clearly mapped out. The capped gas line running along the exposed wall studs, the narrow firing angles, the way Marcus's body partially shielded Hale's from any clean shot. He'd chosen this room deliberately. The way Marcus's stand in the trauma bay had been chaos. This was architecture. What do you actually want? Whitfield said, voice low and controlled in a way that Nora recognized as a man trying to buy time rather than concede ground. I want what I came for. Marcus walks out with me. The data collection continues somewhere more controlled, and in exchange, I don't detonate the small charge I've placed on the gas line behind me, which I assure you is real, unlike the replica your second hostage situation tonight was waving around. Nora's blood went cold. She glanced at the wall, at the innocuous-looking gray box clipped near the capped valve. Small, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of thing that would blend into a construction site and exactly the kind of thing a man like Hale would know how to build. You're bluffing, Doyle said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Test it and find out, Sergeant. I'm not in a rush to die today, but I promise you I'm a great deal less attached to that outcome than every patient currently still in this building. The silence that followed had weight to it. The particular density of a room where everyone understood the math had just changed completely. Doyle's weapon stayed raised, but his stance shifted. The rigid certainty of 30 seconds ago replaced by the calculation of a man realizing he had no good options left. Nora's mind raced through everything she knew, every scrap of training, every instinct honed across years of triage under pressure, and what she landed on wasn't a tactical solution. It was simpler than that, and far riskier. "Marcus," she said. Hale's eyes narrowed. "He's not listening to anyone right now, nurse. The compound's still active in his system." "I don't believe that." She kept her eyes on Marcus, not Hale, watching for the smallest flicker of presence behind the glassy stare. "I think some part of him is still in there, the same part that surfaced in the trauma bay before your goon with the stun gun knocked him back under. I think you need him compliant enough to walk, but not so far gone he can't follow basic instructions, which means there's a window, and I think you're hoping none of us figure out how narrow it actually is. You're welcome to test that theory." "I am." She took one careful step forward, ignoring Hale's hand twitching toward his hip, ignoring Doyle's sharp intake of breath behind her. "Marcus, Shadow 6, do you remember what that meant to you 20 minutes ago?" His eyes, glassy and unfocused, flickered. "You told me you didn't want to hurt anybody," Nora continued, voice low and steady, the same cadence she'd used in the trauma bay, betting everything on the idea that whatever chemical fog Hale had engineered hadn't erased the deeper conditioning underneath it. "This man poisoned you. He's using you. Everything that's happened to you tonight, the building collapsing in your head, your sister terrified in a parking lot, all of it traces back to him standing 3 feet away from you right now." "Don't," Hale warned. "He's not your handler, Marcus. He's not your CO. He's not anyone you owe a single thing to." Marcus's head turned, slow, heavy, toward Hale, something shifting behind his eyes that hadn't been there a moment ago. Not full clarity, but suspicion. The kind of dawning recognition that came when a fog started, just slightly, to lift. "You," Marcus said, voice thick. "You gave me something. At Dana's place. The bottle on the counter." "Marcus, focus on me," Hale said, sharper now, the calm cracking at the edges for the first time. "We had an arrangement." "I don't remember an arrangement." His voice was gaining strength, anger bleeding into it, directed now at the right target for the first time all night. "I remember you showing up 2 weeks ago asking about my discharge paperwork. I remember you saying you could get my medical records expunged if I did one favor for an old contact." His hands curled into fists. "You did this to me." "The compound is also a mild suggestibility agent," Hale said, backing half a step, his hand finally closing fully around the grip of his sidearm. "Don't let her talk you into something you'll regret." "I think I regret trusting you a lot more." The room tipped, all at once, the way these things always did, not gradually, but in a single violent fraction of a second where every careful calculation collapsed into raw motion. Marcus lunged, not at Nora, not at Doyle's officers, but directly at Hale, 240 pounds of trained muscle moving on pure fury, and Hale's weapon came up half a beat too late as the two men collided into the exposed wall studs hard enough to crack drywall. "Gas line!" Nora screamed, lunging forward not toward the fight, but toward the small gray device clipped near the valve, because whatever else happened in the next 3 seconds, that was the variable that could kill everyone in the building, not the two men currently grappling for control of a handgun 8 feet away. Her fingers found the device, fumbling, no training in explosive ordnance disposal, nothing but raw instinct and the desperate hope that whatever Hale had built was simple enough to disable without an engineering degree. A single wire ran from the device into the valve housing. She yanked it free without hesitation, no time to consider whether that was the right move or the move that detonated everything, and the device's single red light blinked out. Nothing happened. She allowed herself exactly one breath of relief before a gunshot cracked through the room, deafening in the enclosed space, and she spun to see Marcus stagger backward, one hand clutched against his shoulder, blood already soaking through his shirt, while Hale scrambled toward the far doorway, weapon still raised, his composed mask completely gone now, replaced by the raw panic of a man whose plan had unraveled in real time. "Nobody move!" Doyle's officers surged forward, but Hale was already through the doorway, into a back stairwell that hadn't been on anyone's map of the secured perimeter, and the sound of his footsteps receded fast into the dark. "Go! Go!" Doyle barked, 2 officers peeling off in pursuit, while Nora dropped to her knees beside Marcus, already tearing at his shirt with the clinical speed of someone who'd done this 100 times in far worse conditions. "Through and through," she said, fingers finding the entry and exit wounds, pressing hard with her palm against the worst of the bleeding. Clavicle's probably fractured, but the brachial's intact. You're not bleeding out. You hear me? You're going to be fine. He poisoned me, Marcus rasped, eyes wet, the fury draining out of him now replaced by something hollow and exhausted. 2 weeks. He's been planning this for 2 weeks. I know. I almost killed people tonight because of him. You didn't kill anyone. She kept pressure steady, glancing up at Whitfield, who was already barking instructions into his radio, mobilizing a medical team and locking down every exit in a 2-block radius. You're going to walk into a courtroom someday and tell them exactly what he did to you, and they're going to believe you, because I'm standing right here as a witness, and so is half the Tacoma PD. Marcus's eyes found hers, glassy but lucid now in a way they hadn't been all night, the chemical fog burning off under the shock of adrenaline and blood loss, and the simple violent clarity of having just been shot by the man who'd engineered his entire breakdown. "Why'd you help me?" he asked. "Nobody else in this building looked at me like I was still a person tonight. Just you." "Because you are one," she said simply. "Everything else is just noise." The medical team arrived within 90 seconds, and Nora stepped back to let them work, her hands shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed, blood drying dark on her palms. Whitfield crouched beside her, his expression grim. "They lost him," he said quietly. "Hale." He had an exit route mapped through a section of tunnel that wasn't on any current blueprint. By the time Doyle's men got down there, the access door was open, and he was gone. "He'll resurface." "He will. Men like that always think they're smarter than the people chasing them right up until they're not." Whitfield's jaw tightened. "I'm calling this in above Doyle's pay grade. Unauthorized human testing on a discharged combat veteran isn't a local PD matter anymore. Federal investigators are going to want every second of tonight documented, starting with you. I'm not the story. You're about to become the only story." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "You realize what you did in there, don't you? You disabled an explosive device with your bare hands. You talked a hostage taker back from a chemically induced psychotic break twice in one night. You did all of it without authority, without backup, without anyone in this building bothering to ask if you were qualified, because nobody thought to ask. I didn't have time to wait for someone to ask. No, you didn't." He stood, offering her a hand up, which she took, suddenly aware of just how badly her legs were shaking now that there was nothing left to run toward. 8 years ago, I offered you a position doing exactly this kind of work. Full-time, official, recognized. You told me you were done being a secret weapon for people who only valued you when something was on fire. I remember. I think tonight just made your case for you a great deal more publicly than either of us expected. Down the corridor, Doyle approached, radio still crackling at his shoulder, his earlier hostility toward Nora replaced now by something closer to grudging respect, the kind law enforcement rarely extended easily. "Vance? Federal liaisons inbound. ETA 15 minutes. They're going to want a full statement, probably more than one, probably over the next several days." "Understood." "And for what it's worth." He hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the sentiment. "You were right. About the room. About him. About all of it. I almost got that girl killed pulling my people in too fast, and you're the reason that didn't happen." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was as close as a man like Doyle was likely to get, and Nora accepted it with a small nod, too exhausted to push for more. She made her way back toward the main trauma bay, past the wreckage of the night. Shattered glass swept into uneven piles, overturned gurneys righted by exhausted staff, the front entrance still gaping open to the night air where the doors had been torn from their frame hours earlier. Holloway stood near the nurse's station, his arm now properly splinted, watching her approach with an expression she'd never once seen him wear in 4 months. "They're saying you disarmed a bomb," he said. "I pulled a wire. Don't make it sound more impressive than it was." It was an explosive device connected to a gas line in an occupied hospital. "I think it's exactly as impressive as it sounds." He shifted his weight, visibly working up to something. "I've been an attending here 11 years. I've trained dozens of nurses. I want you to know that in 11 years, I have never seen anyone handle a multi-phase critical incident the way you handled tonight, and I am deeply, genuinely sorry that it took something like this for me to actually see you. Apology accepted. She didn't say it warmly, but she didn't say it coldly either, just honest, the way she'd been honest with Marcus all night. Doesn't undo 4 months, but it's a start. What can I do going forward? What do you actually need from this place? Before she could answer, her radio, borrowed from Whitfield an hour earlier, crackled with Doyle's voice, tight and urgent, in a way that immediately killed whatever fragile calm had settled over the wrecked trauma bay. Vance, Whitfield, all units, we've got a problem. Hale's vehicle was found 2 blocks out, engine still running, driver's door open. No sign of him. But dispatch just flagged something on the hospital's internal network. Someone accessed Marcus Renner's full service record and your personnel file 40 minutes ago from a terminal inside this building while you were both still in that records room with Hale. Nora's blood went cold for the second time that night. That's not possible, she said. Hale was with us the entire time. That's what I'm telling you, Doyle said. Whoever pulled those files wasn't him. He had someone else inside this hospital the whole time, and they're still here. Whitfield's voice cut through the radio static, low and urgent. Lock every exit. Nobody leaves this building until we account for every badge that's clocked in tonight. Doyle was already moving, barking orders down the corridor, and Nora found herself running through the math of the last 6 hours. Every face she'd passed, every name she'd half-registered and dismissed, because there hadn't been time to wonder who belonged and who didn't. Someone inside Meridian had pulled Marcus's service record and her own personnel file, while Hale kept all of them occupied in a gutted construction zone 2 floors up. That wasn't opportunism. That was coordination. Who has terminal access to personnel files at this hour? She asked Holloway, who'd followed her partway down the hall, still cradling his splinted wrist. HR, admin supervisors, IT, maybe a dozen people total on a night shift. Pull the list. Now. He didn't argue, didn't ask who she thought she was to be giving orders in a hospital she'd worked at for 4 months. Something in his face had finished shifting an hour ago, and he simply turned and moved toward the admin office at a near jog. Whitfield reached her a moment later, phone still pressed to his ear, jaw set. Federal team's 20 minutes out. They want the building sealed until they arrive. Full sweep, every employee ID checked against shift logs. That gives whoever pulled those files 20 minutes to walk out the front door before anyone stops them. I'm aware. He lowered the phone. Which means we don't wait for them. They found the answer faster than either expected, and it arrived not through deduction but through Priya, the young tech Marcus had taken hostage hours earlier, who came hurrying down the hall, still pale and shaken, but moving with the particular clarity of someone who'd just remembered something that mattered. There's a guy, she said, breathless, from IT. He's been in and out of the back offices all night, said he was running diagnostics because the power outage tripped something in the server room. I didn't think anything of it because he's always around, but he wasn't on tonight's maintenance schedule. I checked it myself for an unrelated thing 2 hours ago. Name, Whitfield said. Foster. Daryl Foster. Holloway returned at that exact moment, tablet in hand, scrolling fast. Foster's badge logged into the second-floor admin terminal at 11:47 p.m., records room, same time you 3 were upstairs. Nora's stomach tightened. Where is he now? Badge hasn't logged an exit. He should still be in the building. What? They found him in the server closet behind the radiology suite, a narrow room lined with humming equipment. No windows. Exactly the kind of place a man might choose if he wanted somewhere quiet to disappear into the chaos of a building that had spent the last hour actively trying to kill 3 other people. Foster was mid-30s, soft around the middle, the unremarkable kind of forgettable that made him perfect for exactly this work. And when Doyle's officers came through the door with weapons raised, he didn't run. He simply set down the laptop bag he'd been packing and raised his hands with the resigned posture of a man who'd already calculated his odds and didn't like them. I want a lawyer, he said immediately. You'll get one. Doyle moved forward, cuffs already out. After you tell us where Desmond Hale's heading. I don't know who that is. Your badge logged you into a terminal in the exact room where Hale was holding 2 people hostage, at the exact time he was holding them. You're going to want a better answer than that before the feds get here, because right now you're not looking at accessory to assault. You're looking at accessory to attempted murder and unauthorized human experimentation on a federal asset. And the second word in that sentence is going to make this a lot worse for you than anything happening in this hospital tonight. Foster's composure cracked at the word experimentation, a small flinch that told Nora everything she needed to know about how much he'd actually understood about what he was helping facilitate. "I just pulled files," he said. "That's it. I didn't know what he wanted them for. He paid me to flag certain admissions, cross-reference service records. That's the whole job. I never touched a patient. I never hurt anyone." "You handed him my service history," Marcus said from the doorway. He'd insisted on walking down himself despite the gunshot wound, shoulder bandaged, an arm in a sling, two paramedics hovering uselessly behind him because nobody in that building had quite worked out yet how to tell Marcus Renner no. His face was pale, exhausted, but his eyes were clear now in a way they hadn't been all night. The chemical fog fully burned off, leaving behind something raw and furious and entirely, devastatingly lucid. "You're the reason he knew which buttons to push," Marcus continued, voice low. "You're the reason he knew about the supplement bottle, the discharge paperwork, all of it. You sold him a roadmap into my head." "I didn't know what he'd do with it." "You didn't ask." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's the part I can't get past. You didn't even ask." Foster had no answer for that, and the silence that followed was its own kind of verdict. The particular quiet of a man realizing that ignorance wasn't going to save him from what came next. Doyle cuffed him and let him out, and Nora watched the small, unremarkable man who'd helped orchestrate the worst night of Marcus Renner's recent life disappear down the corridor, flanked by two officers, feeling none of the triumph she might have expected. Just a tired, hollow relief that the building was finally, genuinely secure. The federal team arrived at 1:14 a.m. in a convoy of black SUVs that filled the ambulance bay, and the next several hours dissolved into the particular gray exhaustion of statements given and re-given. Photographs taken of injuries and crime scenes, evidence bagged and tagged under fluorescent lights that made everyone look 10 years older than they were. Nora sat in a cramped conference room across from a federal investigator named Reyes, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, and a notepad she barely glanced at because she'd clearly memorized most of what mattered already from the radio traffic alone. "Walk me through the Shadow 6 reference," Reyes said. "You used a classified adjacent designation to de-escalate a combat veteran in active psychosis. Where did you learn that program existed?" "I served in a joint training rotation 8 years ago. Casualty extraction protocols with elements of several special operations units. Shadow 6 wasn't real in the sense Marcus believed it was real tonight. It was a phrase I knew carried weight in that world, and I used it because I needed something true enough to cut through the noise in his head." "You lied to a man in psychiatric crisis." "I told him a fragment of truth shaped to reach him. There's a difference." Nora met her eyes steadily. "If I'd stood there reciting hospital protocol, he would have killed someone in that room within 90 seconds, possibly that hostage, possibly one of your tactical officers, possibly himself. I made a judgment call with the information and training I had. I'd make it again." Reyes studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind her professional reserve. 8 years in the Army, 2 tours, forward aid station, multiple commendations, separated with an exemplary record, and you've been working a 4-month travel contract at a regional hospital nobody's ever heard of, restocking supply carts. That's the job I had. That's the job you took. Reyes set down her pen. Off the record, Ms. Vance, why? With your background, you could be running trauma programs at any Level 1 center in the country, or doing exactly the kind of liaison work Colonel Whitfield's been trying to recruit you into for the better part of a decade. By his account, why bury yourself in a building where nobody even bothered to learn your last name? Nora was quiet for a moment, turning the question over, because it was the first time all night anyone had actually asked her something true instead of procedural. Because after I got out, everyone wanted the version of me that did something dramatic in a war zone, she finally said. Nobody wanted the version of me that just shows up, does the work, doesn't need to be thanked for it. I thought if I kept my head down somewhere quiet, I could just be a nurse. Not a story, not a symbol, just useful, without anyone needing me to perform what that usefulness cost me to earn. And tonight there wasn't time to be quiet. A faint, tired smile. Turns out that's not really a choice you get to make forever. By the time the sun came up over Tacoma, painting the cracked glass of the shattered front entrance in pale gold light, the building had settled into something that almost resembled calm. The federal team had what they needed. Foster was in custody, already talking, already trading what he knew about Hale's network for a marginally less catastrophic future. An alert had gone out across 3 states for Desmond Hale. His photographs circulated to every federal agency with a stake in unauthorized human experimentation on former military personnel, and Whitfield had personally promised Nora that men like Hale didn't stay invisible forever. Not once an apparatus this large started looking for them. Marcus sat in a recovery room down the hall, his sister Dana finally allowed back in after hours of separation. Her husband Wyatt sitting quietly in the corner with the particular sheepishness of a man who'd nearly gotten himself shot trying to find his family, and had spent the rest of the night sobering up fast under the weight of that realization. When Nora stopped by to check his vitals one last time before her relief arrived, Marcus looked up at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him once during the entire ordeal. Calm. "They told me I'm being referred to a federal veterans program," he said. "Real treatment, not the sticky note they handed me at discharge. Whitfield's pushing for it personally." "Good. I don't remember most of what I said to you in there during the worst of it, but I remember you not flinching. Not once." He shifted slightly against the pillows, wincing at the pull in his shoulder. "Why didn't you?" "Because I've stood in rooms a lot worse than this one, and flinching never saved anybody." She adjusted his IV line out of pure habit, checking the flow rate even though someone else would be managing his care from here. "You didn't do this to yourself, Marcus. A man poisoned you and used your training against you to make you look like a monster on camera. That's not who you are. That's what was done to you. Try telling that to everyone who's going to see the footage of me wrecking this lobby." "I'll tell them myself if I have to." She meant it, and something in her tone must have carried that because Dana, sitting beside the bed, reached over and squeezed Nora's hand without a word, the kind of gratitude that didn't need language to land. "Shadow 6, Marcus said quietly, almost to himself. "Even knowing it wasn't real. I think some part of me needed it to be. Some part of you knew exactly what it stood for, even if the name was borrowed." Nora held his gaze. "People who've carried what you've carried recognize each other. That's the part that wasn't a lie." She found Whitfield in the wrecked lobby an hour later, standing amid the wreckage of the night, watching a construction crew already beginning the slow work of measuring the destroyed entrance for repair. The shattered glass had been swept into neat, devastating piles. The overturned gurneys had been righted. The building was healing in the practical, unglamorous way buildings always did, faster than the people inside it. "Hospital administration's holding a meeting in an hour," Whitfield said without preamble. "CEO flew in from Seattle the second this hit the wire. They're going to want to thank you publicly. Press conference, the works." "I don't want a press conference." "I figured." He almost smiled. "But you might want to hear what they're actually offering, because it's not a plaque and a handshake." Holloway approached as he said it, freshly showered, wrist in a proper cast now, looking like a man who'd spent the pre-dawn hours reckoning hard with something and had come out the other side of it, changed in a way that would probably stick. "They want to offer you a permanent position," Holloway said. "Director of Emergency Response and Crisis Intervention. New role. Built specifically because of tonight. You'd run training for staff, develop de-escalation protocols, have actual authority instead of being told to restock Bay 4 while the building falls apart around you." "That's an administrative job. I'm a nurse." "You were the only person in this entire hospital who acted like a leader tonight," Holloway said. And there was no irony in it, no residual condescension, just a flat, hard-earned admission from a man who'd spent 4 months failing to see what was standing right in front of him. "I was an attending for 11 years and I froze. Security froze. The cops nearly made it worse twice. You didn't freeze once. Not when a man twice your size was swinging an IV pole. Not when there was a bomb wired to a gas line. Not when a federal investigator started asking pointed questions about whether you'd lied to a psychiatric patient. You held this place together with nothing but your voice and your training, and you did it after 4 months of every single one of us treating you like you didn't matter. I don't need an apology dressed up as a job offer. It's not dressed up as anything. It's both. I'm sorry genuinely for how this place treated you, and I also think you'd be extraordinary in this role, and those two things can both be true at once." Nora looked between them, the construction crew working steadily behind them, the morning light catching the dust still hanging in the air, and felt something settle in her chest that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with a decision she hadn't realized she'd already made somewhere in the middle of the worst night of her professional life. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." Every new hire gets a real intake conversation, not a glance at a resume. Background, skills, what they actually bring, not just what fits a shift schedule. I don't want another nurse spending 4 months being invisible because nobody bothered to ask who she used to be. She glanced at Whitfield. "And I want a direct line to your program, Colonel. If this hospital sees another case like Marcus's, I want resources that don't take 90 minutes and a building falling apart to mobilize." "Done," Whitfield said immediately. "Both easily." Holloway extended his uninjured hand. "Welcome to a job you've technically already been doing since the moment those doors blew in." She shook it. The press conference happened 2 days later, smaller than Nora had feared. Mostly local outlets and one national crew that had picked up the story after federal charges against Hale's network started making national news. She stood at a podium she hadn't asked for, in a uniform that still felt slightly foreign after years of fatigues, and answered questions with the same flat, unembellished honesty she'd used on Marcus in the wreckage of the trauma bay. "Some people are calling you a hero," one reporter said. "How does that sit with you?" "I didn't do anything heroic. I did my job. The job I was trained for a long time before I ever wore scrubs." She paused, choosing the next words with the same care she'd chosen every word that night. "What I'd actually like people to take from this isn't that I'm special. It's that there are people walking around every single day who carry skills, history, capability that nobody bothers to ask about, because it's easier to assume someone's ordinary than to find out they're not. I spent 4 months being underestimated in that building, and it nearly cost lives, not because I wasn't capable, but because nobody thought to wonder whether I was. That's not a me problem. That's a pattern, and it's worth paying attention to in every hospital, every workplace, every room where someone quiet gets mistaken for someone unimportant." A young nurse near the back of the press gathering, one of the staff who'd worked alongside Nora for 4 silent months without ever learning her story, raised a hand. "Was Shadow 6 ever real?" she asked. "I keep hearing the name." Nora considered the question, considered the weight Marcus had given it in that trauma bay, the way a single phrase had bought 90 seconds that mattered more than almost anything else that happened that night. "It was real enough to keep people alive," she said. "That's all that ever needed to be true." The reporters scribbled the quote down, and somewhere in the crowd Marcus stood with his sister, arms still in a sling, watching the woman who'd talked him back from the worst night of his life finally get the recognition that should have come years earlier, for a version of courage that had nothing to do with cameras and everything to do with showing up every day, even when no one was watching, even when no one cared to ask. After the cameras packed up and the crowd thinned, Nora walked back through the rebuilt entrance of Meridian General, glass replaced, frame reinforced, the ER beyond it humming with the ordinary chaos of a hospital that had survived something extraordinary and gone back, mostly, to being itself. A new shift was starting. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped, a gurney rolled past, a junior tech laughed at something a colleague said. The simple, unremarkable music of a building doing what it was built to do. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, the motion automatic, grounding. The same motion she'd made 1,000 times before anyone in the city knew her name and would make 1,000 times after most of them had forgotten the headlines. Somewhere behind her, the wreckage of One Impossible Night was already fading into hospital legend, the kind of story staff would tell new hires for years, the kind that would get exaggerated and worn smooth at the edges with each retelling. But Nora knew the truth of it better than anyone, and the truth was simpler than any story version would ever capture. She hadn't been waiting all those quiet months for a moment to prove herself. She'd just been doing the work, the same work she'd always done. The kind that mattered most precisely because it asked for no audience and no applause. The moment had found her, the way it always eventually finds the people who never stopped being ready, whether anyone was paying attention or not. She adjusted her gloves, glanced once more at the rebuilt doors standing solid against the morning light, and turned back toward the ER, ready for whatever came through them next.